Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of In the Artist Studio. My name is Nicole Winthrop, and I'm the membership manager here at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, California. In today's program, Senior Director of Education, Dimitri Broxton, will be in conversation with artist Albert Chong. While the museum's physical space is temporarily closed, you can still catch up with some of Moad's favorite artists in their studios for a rare opportunity to hear from them directly how their work has been impacted by quarantine. Please also visit our archive of past talks on Moad's YouTube channel. This series was made possible by generous donations from the West Ridge Foundation, Art Bridges Foundation, Moad members, and viewers like you. If you've enjoyed Moad online programming this past year, please make a donation today. Our year-end giving is coming to an end, and we truly count on your support to sustain programming like In the Artist Studio. On behalf of the Moad board and staff, I'd like to now take a moment to hold space for those whose lives have been lost at the hands of police brutality and systemic racism here and throughout the world. Moad stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. On behalf of the Moad board and staff, I'd also like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples who have stewarded the land we are located. An Oakland native, Dimitri Broxton has over 18 years of experience working in the field of education and the arts. At Moad, he leads the education programs that enhance the visitor experience at the museum. His department's mission is to connect youth, educators, and the public to the historical, cultural, and intellectual contributions of the worldwide African diaspora. Outside of his role at Moad, Dimitri is an independent curator and practicing artist represented by Patricia Suito Gallery. Albert Chong is a contemporary artist working in the mediums of photography, installation, and mixed media art. His works reference personal mysticism, spirituality, race, and identity. Born in Kingston, Jamaica, Chong is the last child of a large family of merchant Afro-Chinese Jamaican parents and immigrated to the US at the age of 19. He went on to attend the School of Visual Arts in New York City, where he received a BFA with honors. Chong has received an individual artist fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, the prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship in the field of photography, and the Pollock-Krasner Grant. He has exhibited nationally and internationally, representing his home country, Jamaica, at the 2001 Venice Biennale, the 1998 Sao Paulo Biennale, and the 2000 Havana Biennale. Let's meet Dimitri and Albert in the Artist Studio.
All right, thank you so much, Nicole. It's so great to have you. Thank you for doing that introduction. And Albert, thank you so much for being here.
Honor. It's a great privilege and an honor to be here.
So I have to, you didn't know I was gonna do this, but I have to pull this little this little friend out. Yes, this sweet little friend.
It came out of your neck of the woods up there, you know, from the former Friends of Photography when they were alive and kicking. They were a really vibrant photo organization back in the day. And they did take a gamble on me back then.
Oh, I'm so glad that they did.
Yeah. It was actually the person who really made it possible was then Michael Reed, who was I think he was a photo editor there. I forget what he was, but he was in charge of the edit of the books. He was, yeah. So he made that happen.
So I just have to say, I was a sophomore in high school when the book came out. This is kind of taking us back, and I had just started studying photography in high school, and you know, when you go to study photography, at least in the 90s, none of the photographers' work resonated with me. You know, there were beautiful images, beautiful compositions, beautiful balance of light, things like that I could appreciate. But then, you know, stumbling across this book and having, you know, an artist whose work spoke to me, spoke to my lived experiences and my identity, and, you know, just had the entire African diasporic experience wrapped up into the neat pages of your work was just, it completely blew my mind. And so, I just have to say, this has been a dream of mine to have a conversation with you since 1994. And I am so honored to be in conversation with you and also to share your work with the rest of the world.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know how to respond, but yeah, those are big props. I'm so glad.
I told you
go ahead.
I told you I'd fanboy a little bit at the beginning of this.
Well, always appreciated, because encouragement is so important to so many of us to keep working, especially, in the visual arts, where things can seem so incredibly difficult and political at times. So.
Oh my goodness, ever so. And I think you've been in Boulder. We could have talked about that for a while. You've been in Boulder, Colorado, and I understand you're also a professor there. How has this last year been for you?
Well, the in February is when the COVID thing really struck, and I was in the middle of a sabbatical at the time. And I was actually caught up kind of preparing work for about 3 or 4 exhibitions, mostly group exhibitions. And needless to say, a lot of these got either put on hold or some got canceled. And I was putting out a lot of money and time in crates and printing and everything else. And then wham, it just happened. So it was an interesting time. I started feeling guilty about the sabbatical because I couldn't actually do much besides just continue working, which I do anyway, but I couldn't actually attempt to fulfill some of what I had planned for the sabbatical, but it was all good. And then that went right into the summers. Summers I usually spend in Jamaica on, you might not know this, but I'm actually a subsistence farmer as well.
No, I did not know that. Wow.
Yes. My family my father had bought some rugged land in the hills in St. Catherine in Jamaica, about 120 acres of really what we call bush or woodland. And it's, I use the term farm for lack of a better term, but it's really just a clearing with tons and tons of trees all around it. So I've been rebuilding that place since 2013. And so I generally spend my summers there, and so was unable to do that this year because of everything going on. And then it kind of went from that straight into the next semester, which involved me trying to teach both in-person and hybrid, meaning remote and in-person. But then when I started seeing that I had more students online than I had in the classroom, it was not making sense to keep doing it. So yeah, so it's become interesting. I actually find that I'm a lot more tired from teaching by Zoom than I would normally when I'd be first in the classroom.
Exactly, and then there's also not the transition between leaving your home to then go to go to the class. So I hear you.
Yeah. So, academic house arrest is one way of thinking about it.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. So, I think before we get into showing your work, well, I actually did have a question. I wanted to follow up with that. You said you're a subsistence farmer. What do you grow?
Oh, everything tropical. It's easier to tell you what we don't grow than what we do.
Wow.
I mean, like I said, we're subsistence, so not much of it gets to market. Although we do sell jackfruit and ginger and nutmeg, turmeric, whatever, we have in abundance, but it's more about it's more subsistence than everything else. So because it's tropical, everything grows there. And so there are fruits I don't have. I've been trying to turn the place into a preserve for all tropical fruits, and I've been wanting to try and get stuff from Asia, stuff like rambutan and mangosteen, and but I've been unable to do that. Although I do have lychees growing, and they're doing well, and everything else. But no, it's we grow everything.
That's
pretty much.
incredible.
I mean, it's not an organized type of a deal, and it's really hilly, and it's mostly off grid. And so it's an interesting kind of place, but I love it. I regard it as my my fortress of solitude. Is how I think about it. If you read comics back in the day.
That's the credit. We all need a little bit of that in our lives, especially these days. Before I get into showing your work and we do this deep investigation of the work, can you talk about your journey into becoming an artist, and what made you choose photography as your primary medium? How did that whole thing start? And I know it started pretty early for you.
Yes, it did. I guess when I think about it, when I look back, I think I was somewhat of an introvert as a teenager, as a youngster growing up in Jamaica. And I wasn't out and about like a lot of my peers, meaning I wasn't, real adventurous, running all over Kingston. So I would be home after school much of the time. And I started looking for ways of expressing all of this stuff that was going on in my head, being someone who was sort of in their head, being somewhat of an introvert. And I was attracted to song lyrics. And I started kind of, transcribing the lyrics of like popular songs, because I actually like singing, vocalizing. And I was actually a member of what was called the Kingston College Chapel Choir, which was the high school that I went to, and it was a highly regarded choir in the country. And so I just regarded it as like part of the process of music. And I really enjoyed the lyricism, the poetry of the lyrics, and how they combined with music, the compositional structure of music. And that to me was the first art. And but then I realized that wasn't enough. I wasn't, it wasn't my own music I wasn't actually creating. I was more just kind of, transcribing and singing. And so in high school, by my third year in high school, I used to play football, soccer, as you guys know it, in the afternoons. And Jamaica, Kingston being incredibly hot, I could live in Kingston these days. I can't take the heat, but back then I didn't really care. And I would be hot, sweaty after a game of football. And I had some friends who were in a camera club at the time. And the camera club was really just a small room with the windows blocked out and an air conditioner, which was important. The only reason the only reason I ended up in photography was seeking an air conditioner.
I love it.
Well, what it was, I'd spent too much time in the other air conditioner on campus, which was in the headmaster's office. And committed quite a few misdeeds and end up involuntarily enjoying his air conditioner. But I would go up and knock on the door, and they would let me in, and there was a bench that was under the enlarging table. And I would sleep there, and it became a regular sort of a thing. I would, go in and I would cool down and take a nap. One day I decided to see what was going on and looked over a friend's shoulder. D. Brown, if I recall, Donovan Brown, looking over his shoulder and watching the print come up in the developer. And that was probably, when I think about it, one of the great epiphanies of my life. Because in that moment, I was struck by the huge potential, the amazing possibilities that this magical thing could produce. I remember thinking to myself, watching that come up, that, damn, just about anything I could possibly imagine, I could possibly put on film and turn it into an image. And I I wish I had taken actual art classes, because if I did, I might have become a, painter or something else, but I didn't. And so I said, well, I don't need to take art classes. Who needs to paint if you can photograph? It's so much quicker, and so that is what ended up starting that whole process. I became completely fascinated with the process. I remember actually exposing prints under the enlarger. And then I would take them home and would lock myself in a dark bathroom or in a downstairs closet and I would have little trays of the chemistry, and I wanted to see if it would still come up, if it would survive the bus ride from school to home, which it did, and then I started developing at home. And then later my father gave me a room, which was like, one of the room for one of our helps, because we were confectioners. We were shopkeepers initially, and then when things got to be really dangerous downtown Kingston, where our shop was, we ended up selling the business and moving uptown, and then starting a popcorn factory in the backyard. We were the biggest producers of popcorn in the island, which is not to say much, because not too many people eat popcorn in Jamaica. Anyway,
innovators.
Yeah, you could call it that. We were making caramelized corn. But anyway, there was this bedroom, which was there for the help. And it was just given to me. He said, oh, use that. But it was incredibly hot because there was no air conditioning. We had a little vent. And so I would mostly be there in my shorts, and I would empty out the scorpions before I started, because, scorpions love dark places. And
Wow.
I would normally kill about 4 before I'd start working. I'd never gotten stung. Well, I've gotten stung when I was a kid, but not from one of those. But anyway, long story short, this dark room was my first dark room. It was under a mango tree in the backyard, and it was incredibly hot. But a lot of my friends would come hang out there, and people would like see the process, and it became a kind of a hangout joint. But then later during, I later became more senior in the camera club and end up taking over leadership of it. And we started making money from the camera club. We started a business and we were doing yearbook photos and passport pictures for, schoolmates or other boys in the school. Kingston College is an all boys school. Jamaica has a segregated system of education for some strange reason. But anyway, I remember us being called out by the headmaster, calling us capitalists, because this was in the middle of assembly one day, and he went on about the camera club and how we were making money and how we were capitalists. At that time in Jamaica, being called a capitalist was the worst insult you could launch.
Oh, wow.
Because we were in the midst of a democratic socialist experiment under former Prime Minister Michael Manley. But anyway, one of our goals was to actually win the Jamaican Festival for the Arts, which was like a celebration of Jamaican independence every year in August, and where they give out medals and awards to people in the arts, whether it be in music or dance or painting or photography. And so this was one of my first goals earlier on. In fact, it was a goal of most of the camera club at the time, was to win the festival in photography. Unfortunately, none of my other club members actually went for it. I was the only one who did. And that was one of my first big encouragements, because I got second and third place, like a silver and bronze medal. The guy who came in first, who got the gold, was a newspaper photographer, the Daily Gleaner, and he was damn good. I mean, I wouldn't hold a candle to him. I don't even know how I came in. I think maybe they just had to give out second and third to somebody. But anyway, that became sort of one of my early goals. And then after that, my family is a sort of an immigrant, like many Jamaican families. We tend to be migratory. Jamaicans tend to travel a lot. And there's probably more Jamaicans outside of the country than in the country. So my parents were waiting for me to finish high school, because they tried to get me to leave in the middle of high school, and I refused. And when I finished, I headed off to New York. They headed to Florida. And I was living with some sisters there. And whilst there, I had to figure out what I was going to do next. I mean, obviously, I was going to go to school, go to college, but what college? I didn't want to do business administration like so many of my like my siblings have done and so many other Jamaicans. I just found that to be incredibly boring. And I was supposed to take over the family business in Jamaica, but didn't want to do that either. I wanted to do art.
Wow.
And so somebody had mentioned that it was possible to get an education in photography, learning photography and making art with it. And the top of that list that I got was the School of Visual Arts.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only place I applied to, and they accepted me, which was amazing as well. And the rest was sort of history. And from there, I became involved with the art community in New York, mostly the Black art community for the most part, and hooked up with a lot of amazing people way back then. People you would probably know of, people like Deborah Willis, Kelly Jones, Danny Dawson, on and on and on and on. The long list of people.
only the heroes of the art world.
Well, these were incredible people at the time. I mean,
wow.
We were all locked out of the system and couldn't show anywhere, and we were all doing alternative shows, and they started rearranging, started curating shows and all that. In my last year at SVA, I was sent uptown by a friend, Wayne Providence, who said I should go see this guy at the Studio Museum whose name was Daniel Dawson. And I went up to see him, and he really loved the work. He was like moved by the work, and he said, I wish I had known about you. I would have put you in the show that we have up now. But he got on the phone instantly and picked up the phone and called Deborah Willis, who was at the Schomburg at the time, and sent me over to her, just 10 blocks away. So I grabbed my portfolio and walked over, and that was sort of how it started. And between those two individuals, they kind of, involved me in a lot of their projects and shows, and and so that's sort of how it started in terms of my photography and my time in New York.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, it's just, I just want to say, I'm really glad you did not go and pursue painting because the world would be without this incredible talent, or maybe you would have gone there, and I don't know, kind of the way that you're talking about your story, it seems like it's a combination of, if one wants to believe in destiny, that, these paths that you didn't really consciously seek out, but also the fact that you just continued along the path of pursuing this without it seems like also without an extreme number of models to go off of at the time.
Yes, there weren't a lot of models at the time. I used to devour photo magazines, but back in those days it was like real amateur type photography, popular photography and that kind of stuff, and I was all over it, but I also I wanted to be included in those magazines. I wanted to have my work be included in popular culture. I wanted to be part of the consciousness, the psyche of the world, if possible. So I had all these big goals. I didn't know if it was at all possible, but I earlier on kind of realized that to achieve some of these goals, it would be imperative, it would be essential that my work be different or stand out or be separate from what my peers were doing. At SVA, we were all kind of thrown into this whole street photography thing, and we were all told we should be street photographers. And everybody, those who could afford it had their Leicas, those who couldn't ran around with the old SLRs, shooting fire hydrants and pigeons and people who didn't want to be photographed, and bums in the Bowery, and on and on and on. And I remember a conversation in the film developing room on the 5th floor of the 21st Street building with my old friend Lorna Simpson. when I remember saying to her, you know, I can't keep doing this shit anymore. I mean, we're all doing the same. She was a street photographer at the time as well. So we're all doing the same shit and it all looks the same. And I'm bored. I don't know why I'm doing this. I said, I gotta get out. I gotta go inside. I gotta do something differently. I need to do something that's gonna talk about who I am and not about the concrete Babylon as I saw it at the time, you know, that I was dealing with living in New York. So that kind of was very helpful in that I was able to kind of do work that was different from that of my peers. Because I saw photography in much the same way that, you know, people understood paintings or sculpture. And that was something you made from scratch and not necessarily something you went out and found or recorded or, you know, went out on the streets to find. I said, why do I have to do that? Why can't I make it from scratch? And so that was the impulse earlier on.
I love it. I'm gonna read. We've got a couple of comments. The majority of our audience today is on Facebook, and so thank you today for bringing the comments over into Zoom so that we can see them. We've got a couple of them. So the first comes from Ashara, who says that she first experienced your work as Black art, African American Studies undergrad at Metropolitan State College of Denver, and you were a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. Viewing your photography and installation work providing an opening in her spirit, longing for an embodied ceremonial ritual art curatorial practice. She has never forgotten about that feeling. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. All right. Those are big props.
It is. And I know exactly what she's talking about. And then the next one comes from James, who first saw your work when he was brought a portfolio to a downtown New York City gallery in the early 90s. He says it's a trip to see him, to see you here and now. And also, and also love talking about our own background as fellow Blasians.
Yes, we are Blasians.
I love it. And you know, with that, I want folks, because one of my colleagues who is a bit younger was like, you know, when he saw your work, was like, how did I not know about this artist? This is incredible. And I think, you know, that's the feeling that your work gives to folks. Because I just remember that very first images, and I think it was the two sisters, I want to say, was the first image that I saw. I was arrested, and, you know, immediately like, how does someone take personal history and, you know, and then also, you know, adding elements of care to the work. And I'm just gonna stop talking. I'm gonna pull the work up and it's just give me 1 second to pull this completely up for everyone and use it the proper way.
I like doing this talk this way. I have no responsibility for actually showing the work. So I just gotta talk.
Yes. And so, you know, I really wanted to start off with this one. And I think Allende and I, Brooklyn, New York, 1982. Just because I feel like this image also, you know, embodies the personal, you and your son, and I know your daughter is here watching with us as well. But, you know, the experimentation that I think always finds its way through all of your pieces, the experimentation, the ritual, the ancestral. And so can you talk about this piece, please?
Yeah. Let's see how I start. We lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn at the time. This was, you know, before Williamsburg is what it is today. We moved into Williamsburg around 79, 80, and it was pretty much of a sort of a wasteland at the time. You know, but you know, it was a lot of artists were moving there, and so we had a fourth floor, a loft on the fourth floor. 705 Driggs Avenue on Driggs and Grand is where it was, if I recall. But anyway, I I started doing these works, and it was when I started moving indoors to kind of do these works. And I started out doing self-portraits because it was real difficult to kind of do works with a model, because I couldn't impart to them what I was trying to do or what was necessary for the works. And so it occurred to me that this work could only be done with myself, because I'm always available. I know what I'm trying to do, but I don't know how I would explain it to somebody else. Because, you know, the whole thing is sort of in your head. It's sort of, you know, I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of abstract ideas about identity and Black militancy and nationalism and, you know, race and the ideas about Africa and all this other stuff. But anyway, this was one of the early works before I started using burlap. And so this was like a, you know, a backdrop for painting. And so he must have been like under a year old at the time. And, you know, he was a perfect little model. I didn't actually intend it to be anything major. This wasn't a planned image. I was just there working, and you know, his mom was there as well, my ex-wife Frances, and so just kind of put him on my feet and was moving him around, and she fired the camera, and yeah, it wasn't really anything planned, put it that way.
That's wild. That's wild. So the exposure, so you didn't intentionally shoot with the long exposure, it just...
Well, I did. I mean,
okay.
That was part of what I was doing at the time. So yes, I guess I had planned it somewhat in terms of what I was doing, but I never really go into any kind of deep organization or planning for a lot of my works. A lot of it comes to me in visions in my head, and I see them. I don't even sketch them out or write them out. They come into my head, and I sort of manage to file them away and then make them. But he didn't have a whole lot of say in the matter in terms of model at the time. So yeah.
I mean, and you know, I think with the ghosted image that we end up with, you know, there's so many different readings that one can make of this work. You know, I remember, I don't remember who the critic was that I was reading. I was like, where are my notes at? But you know, spoke about when you first had this work exhibited. You know, he spoke about how you know, the act of ghosting of the figure almost brings in an ancestral element to it, and you know, one gets to wonder. You know, we know that it's your son and you, but you know, could this also be other generations? Could this be, you know, you and your father, or your son and his son? You know, it starts to kind of blur those lines of who the individuals are, and you know, is that an intended outcome for you?
All right. Well, at the time, I was actually trying to use the long exposures in terms of how it would create the kind of translucency and transparency and ethereal nature of the forms as they sort of blur through the time exposures. I was using that as to relate it to the idea of spirituality, of a kind of sort of, I don't know, I related to this kind of weird idea about mysticism, in that you're intangible, you're a spirit, that you're you know, you're a ethereal being. I don't know how to explain it, but
I think that's the perfect explanation.
Yeah, that was sort of the ideas behind these, was the idea of trying to portray the spirit by blurring the body, by making the body become more of a flowing type of entity as opposed to something solid. No.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's for me, it remains absolutely brilliant and arresting. So
well, he's gonna be 40, I think, next year.
All right. I'm sure this still has a special place for him.
He lives in Denver. So I don't know. We'll see. Okay, the sisters.
The sisters, yes.
So with this image, keep in mind that people, generally poor people, especially in Jamaica was no different. At that time let me explain what the picture is. The smallest child is my mother. And she had a similar kind of history to my father. They were both had similar kind of backgrounds, and that they were both half Chinese, meaning that how do I put it? My grandfathers were Chinese and my grandmothers were Afro-Jamaican.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so these two kind of found each other because my father had a similar background in that he didn't know his mother, that she left him when he was a child. And my mother's mother had done the same thing. And they were both raised by relatives to some degree. But anyway, my mother didn't have a lot of documentation or any images of her as a child besides this image, because people were not photographed very often.
Mm-hmm.
The technology wasn't available. And you were only photographed on very special occasions, especially when you could afford it. You'd go to a photo studio. And then, you know, it would be a formal type of portrait. And so this photograph had survived, and she had sent it to me, asking me if I could fix it, because it had a tear, which you can see down the center. It was a rip, and this was before Photoshop. And so I realized the only way it could be fixed was to rephotograph it. So I rephotographed it. And then I go, well, that's too easy. What do I do now? I mean, I can't, you know. I had to really muck around with it. I've done what she wants. Now it's time for me. So I end up trying to grab all of this stuff. I think of the objects as sort of like a toy box, like what's in, my set of toys. But I also think of them as the tools that would be in my watch or in my chest if I were a shaman. All right, these are power objects that I sometimes use to kind of to amplify the power or the presence of the image and what it's trying to say. And so I had this strong affinity to organic objects, to skulls and feathers and bones and anything organic, flowers. What have you. And so I had this stuff laying around, and I decided, okay, let's use the image as the background, the image of the photograph. And then, considering there was no Photoshop then, I was doing my own Photoshop by this idea of layering. And sometimes I would then rephotograph the image that I photographed, because I was using Polaroid at the time, which was amazing stuff back in the day, because it actually increased the break in the times. Well, not increase, but decrease it, meaning that there was no darkroom involved. I didn't have to go into a darkroom to develop the film. A Polaroid, I could drop into a tray of sodium sulfide and put it in a tray to wash, and I'm ready to go.
That's incredible.
So this really increased the productivity in terms of my creativity, in terms of being able to make changes on the spot to the images. And so that's sort of what happened with this. There was a show that was traveling around the country that was curated by Deb Willis. And I think it was called, might have been called either Convergence or the Constructed Image. But this appeared in the New York Times when the show hit New York. And my mother and some of her relations who saw the image were very unhappy of what was being done, because they saw it as, as black magic, as obeah, as, witchcraft. And they're saying, why are you using our images to do this stuff? I mean, I had to put out quite a bit of fires back then because of this, to try and explain to them, well, if it's witchcraft, it's really pretty mild in terms of what witchcraft is. I mean, this is not your big you know, this is not your big and bad kind of voodoo type of witchcraft, you know. So anyway, that's sort of how that image got made, and it kind of led to a bunch of others. It then had me started thinking about family photographs. I'd always been interested in the family album since I was a kid, because being the last of about 8 children, or more like 9, but anyway, being the last, I didn't know who, you know, the relations were, and so I learned about the family through the family photo album. And so this image was taking me back. And I was also moved by the fact that my mother had no actual documentation of her life as a child, because she wasn't privileged enough, and because of, you know, who we were. And then I started realizing how important this image was to her, and was to, you know, a lot of people who were not affluent and didn't grow up in affluent societies, didn't have access to those technologies, and how much, you know, how much of their lives have not been kind of documented or become part of popular culture because of poverty, or because of lack of affluence, or lack of technology, or because of where you lived at, you know. There was, yeah. But anyway.
That's that's incredible. We do a series with the MOAD docents called Art as We See It, and we're primarily going through the archives, the publicly available archives, to look for portraits. So it's interesting you said that. Last week we just focused on family portraits and the importance of that single image that, you know, oftentimes was the only image that so many people of African descent were able to have, and how much, you know, importance it is to be seen and to be documented through photography, and you know, the limitations when you are especially Black around the world, to be able to have that portrait.
Yeah, it's a reaffirmation of your existence, that you matter, that we're as important as anybody else on the planet.
I wonder if that, this act of your mother having this one photograph, from the special occasion with her sisters, and how this one precious object meant so much to her. I also just wonder if that also played some kind of a role in you pursuing photography. Do you know if there was a connection, or did they just kind of happen?
I think they just sort of kind of aligned, but it was definitely not thought out, dedicated for the most part. I just remember getting this photo in the mail. Says,
okay.
I want you to fix this picture. I didn't know I take pictures. I mean, my parents didn't really understand what I did, or what this whole photo thing was about. I mean, they were
until it ends up in the New York Times, huh?
Even then, they didn't quite get it.
Got it.
Even then.
So I'm switching to this photograph, the seated presence, and again, we've got the ghosted image, and then, I think also this piece, if the previous image was your mild explanation with ritual and spiritual aspects, this photo is you definitely going into it, head first and entirely. And I think, kind of as you said, so many of your work does invoke Obeah or Santeria or Yoruba or any of these African diasporic symbols and religious iconography. What's your relationship with those practices? And then, you kind of said your toolbox of shaman's tools. How is this all integrated into your practice? Is it as a practitioner? Is it for reference? Can you talk a little bit more about those aspects?
It's definitely a thorny subject. Because I can't claim to be no shaman. That's for damn sure, but I do feel that possibly in another incarnation, in another life, in another time, I might have been, and that I do have a very strong connection to the idea of the intuition, especially in relation to the making of art. And to make a lot of these works, I actually had to struggle to shut down my mind and to shut down all the influences that had to do with, you know, art and pop culture and, you know, America, everything, in order to make these. So I somewhat saw myself as a sort of a conduit for some of these works to happen. I was merely the sort of the medium or the channel through which some of these happen. And in other works, I'm actually fairly proactive as well. And so, but it's a fine line, you know, and it's referential. It's definitely not, I hope nobody's gonna look at this and go, well, that's Santeria, or that's voodoo, or that's Obia, or Lukume, or, you know, Macumba, or Candomblé. It's none of the above. It's really my response to the idea of an alternative to Christianity. That we came from, you know, an amazing place in regards to being spiritual people, you know, who kind of understood the world through, you know, the animated forces that control the natural environments and all that abounds in it, whether it be God of trees or of rivers and streams or of oceans or you name it. And so I was trying to tune in or tap into that with some difficulty, I'm gonna add, but that's actually what I was trying to do. And so I would bring in objects that I would try and use to kind of make connections to some of these ideas. And so it's tricky. Originally, I started out wanting, especially with the eye traits, this is part of. The early eye traits that happened in New York were all done on burlap, or what we call in Jamaica crocus bag. And back then I was looking for a background that would create an interior landscape. And I remember flashing back to my childhood of going to the sugar factories or to the sugar warehouses with my father to buy sugar. We'd buy these 112-pound bags of sugar. And I remember the smell of these warehouses, you know, stacked like 30 feet high with massive bags of sugar, all in these crocus bags or these burlap bags. And that smell and the idea of this sackcloth, which is the humblest kind of textile you can find anywhere. I ended up using that in the photographs. I remember buying the whole thing and then putting it together. And then it was too new. It was all nice and pressed and everything else. And I got, well, is it working? I wasn't quite sure. And we had 2 cats at the time in our loft, and they started pissing on it. And of course, my response is to then put it in the washing machine. And that changed everything, because then that gave it texture. It became nicely crumpled and crushed, and ended up creating that interior landscape that I was after in terms of that. Then, but this particular image was made in Colorado many years later, and it's not part of the work that was done in New York. And at this point, I was becoming more self-conscious about using myself in images, and I wouldn't appear much in my work anymore because some of it had to do with vanity. I felt that I don't look nothing as good as I did back in my 20s. You know, I'm now bald, you know, like on and on and on. And like, so a bit of vanity kind of factored into the fact that I don't make these anymore. And it becomes difficult for me to kind of to do that. I'm not as fearless, maybe, is what it is. You know, and it requires a sort of fearlessness to be able to make it work fully. You have to fully believe it. And I don't think I was as invested as I was back in the day, although I was still trying to make these. And so, yes, seated presence. Underneath the chair is a gorilla skull. And the things the rock says actually coal, pieces of coal that forms that circle. And then there's an antelope skull in the center of the chair. So I'm using multiple exposures or time exposures in some cases. So I will start out with a long exposure, and I'll photograph the chair first with the antelope skull, and then I'll move in and remove that, and then sit down, and yeah. And so, yeah, these are somewhat tricky for me, just because sometimes people believe or want to believe that I'm actually doing kind of hardcore kind of, African rituals, when I'm actually just trying to be referential in terms of trying to lead the mind down that particular road.
Yeah, I mean, I think the quality of it has so many entry points for folks, and I think also, I think also when we think about the New World African diasporic religions, they tend to draw upon so many different sources, so many different mother or father religions from the continent, as well as native spirituality. And so, I mean, I think by default, then the work almost speaks to anyone.
Yeah.
And it's not seeped out. I wouldn't say it's seeped into one particular religion for me, at least, or that it would read that way, but more of being something connecting to the ancestral realm or the spiritual realm.
Absolutely. What I was going for. What was I gonna say? Well, I'll come back to it. It'll come back to me.
Well, I have no doubt that it will come back to you. And I thought this one was also really interesting and amazing. I think I want to say that we did have this piece because at MOAD we did have Dr. Willis's exhibition, close to when the museum first opened. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember if this one was exactly part of that or not, but I know that this one just had so much resonance for me. Yes. You also bringing so much personal into the work.
Yes, I did remember going to an exhibition when the museum first opened, and mm-hmm. I was invited to do just for a luncheon thing, actually, with another well-known artist. So yeah, but I don't remember whether this was there or not, to tell you the truth. But what you're looking at is my father addressing this group of Chinese Jamaicans, business people. And, he liked to speak. He was like one of those types of individual who loved an audience. And you could see it here. And so when he died in 1989, I started doing quite a bit of soul searching about his life and who he was and its relation to me, because I then realized that all these years, I never sat down with him and got the full family history and get all the details. I should have recorded him. But you never think that they're just gonna, mm-hmm. he died suddenly and without any kind of warning. He was hypoglycemic. But so I guess I started doing works about him to kind of deal with that guilt, or, the fact that I didn't actually get this really valuable information from him. And so in '89, I was sent to Jamaica to find a will, because he never left a will. He was a justice of the peace and had prepared many wills for many people. But I guess,
but not for, yeah.
Who wants to prepare your own will? Nobody wants mm-hmm. to face that kind of mortality, to face that inevitability, that absolute inevitability. And I think that's what he was dealing with. But it left us in a kind of an odd situation where so many of our properties in Jamaica went into probate. Mm. And I guess that kind of factors into the story about the land, because I had grown up running around this land, and I cherished the memories of driving to the country with him. to go, to go up to the land and to bring back produce from the land to, to sell in Kingston. There was a really beautiful great house, or what would have been called a plantation house back there in the town, so it wasn't a plantation. And it got torched by 1970, 72. We had acquired the land in 68. But, and so after it got torched, it changed the history of our relationship with that place and with that part of the country. Because now it was meant to be like the country home. A retreat for the family to get out of Kingston where we could go. But now that there was no house, the family didn't care anymore. They wouldn't, weren't interested in going. So my father rebuilt, but he rebuilt in a kind of slapdash kind of way. And not any kind of, And he rebuilt primarily to house a caretaker. But anyway, I am rambling a little bit here. But I guess the point I'm coming to is how single acts can actually change history. Because if that act of arson hadn't taken place, we would have established a really meaningful relationship with that place and with the local community. I've now had to do that since 2013 in order to rebuild the place. And so what I'm getting to is that after his death, this was the only piece of property that could not be sold because of its size. And we couldn't buy it. It was the only thing I wanted. The last conversation I had with him was about this land. And I remember his reply was, sure, don't worry about that, man. Whatever is mine is yours. And I go, that don't help me much, but. And so by default, it ended up back in my possession because I'm the only one who's still tuned into Jamaica, who still returns. Still is, the place is in my blood. There is no escaping that place. And so I've been returning, and I've established really good relations with the local community. I've got to know a lot of the people. They know who I am now, and so yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean that story I think can resonate with so many folks.
And so what you're seeing here is his driver's license. I was going through a lot of his paperwork in 1989, looking for a will. I had gone through everything. I was going through safe deposit boxes. I was talking to all his friends, but there was no will to be found. And so the only thing I actually, like I said, I cared about was that land, and it ended up in my possession because none of my siblings are all much older and are now disconnected from the country for the most part. They're now mostly Americans by default. And I didn't want to see that for myself. I didn't, there is just so much about who we are because of that place. And I don't see a way to separate myself from that place. It is so much a part of who we are, or who I am. So yeah. That's
amazing. I'm so glad that you have that legacy and that you can also pass that on to your future generations. I want to let our audience know that we are planning to go over time today. We're not going to finish right at 2 o'clock, but I do invite you to add your questions to the Q&A, and we will get to them shortly. So please, as we go through these, and I'm going to try to get through. We have a few more images. I think it's okay if we don't get through all of them, because
I will try and make my answers a little shorter. I realize.
No. This conversation is rich, and I am lavishing in every single moment of it. So no worries at all on my part.
Okay.
I think we're also going back into.
This is still one of my favorite images. And I'm not supposed to have favorites because they're some of my children. But I always remember, seeing this in my head, and then when it was made and looking at the Polaroid, I go, yeah, that's the one. When you're looking at that piece of film and you go, yeah, that's it. Love it. But it's called Blessing the Throne. And here I'm blessing the throne. I think I'm using primarily cigars. I used to use weed, ganja, but that took a lot out of me to generate.
I can imagine.
And it was kind of expensive. And my studio was in the university, in the art department, and people would walk by and go, looks like Albert's walking today.
I love it. I love it.
So I had to kind of, go to tobacco, because the spirits really actually love tobacco. They are as addicted to nicotine as humans, as we are for the most part. So this was about kind of to kind of cleanse or bless this setting. So yeah, this actually came out of some installation works that started earlier on when I was in grad school. And so the chair was one that I had picked up off the street in Brooklyn, actually, in Williamsburg. And at the time I was trying to figure out how to cook Jamaican food. I never actually learned.
Okay, so those are plantains under there, huh?
Well, there are plantains underneath, I think. There might be some bananas there too. But the chair is covered with codfish, or saltfish as we call it in Jamaica, salted cod. And that I was using because it figures so prominently in the national dish, even though the fish is becoming unaffordable for most Jamaicans because it's imported from Canada.
For the saltfish and ackee?
Yeah, the ackee and saltfish and all that. And so I would buy the codfish in these, they wouldn't cut it up like we have in Jamaica. In Jamaica, the codfish gets cut up into little sections. But I was buying it from a Korean grocery store in Williamsburg. Okay. And they would have them whole, like the whole fish, and they would cut it in half. And I said, don't cut it, And I would take it home and I would peel the flesh off and save the skin. And I started covering a whole lot of stuff with the skin, including chairs and books and staffs and on and on. But anyway, that's the story behind the chair in and of itself. Yeah. There are actually Joshua tree spines on there as well.
I was wondering what those were. Okay, on the chair.
In California, in the time when I'd go out into the deserts, and there'd be fallen trees, and I would it's not good to take these things from the national park, but they're already dead and on the ground.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Wow, such a powerful piece. And
self-portrait with the baboon skull. Yeah, like I said, I really had a fascination with the idea of skulls, because to me, they're like the most important part of any kind of being, because the mind, the brain, it's all centered in the skull. And the skull, to me, is sort of like an eggshell. It's a container for our consciousness. And the thing that you're seeing on the out that it's all in is a turtle shell from the inside out. And this also came from that Korean grocery store. Actually, it was a fishmonger on Havermont Street in Brooklyn. This guy I used to know, and he used to kind of have all kinds of stuff, and he gave me this big turtle shell. And so, yeah. And so sometimes I don't know what I'm doing with all of this stuff. I get stuff, and they might sit around for years before I find the right use for it. So that's sort of what happened with this one.
Wow. Yeah, I love the fact that your head is also kind of merging with this one in some kind of way.
Mm-hmm. I would borrow skulls and stuff from different departments, biology, natural history, what have you. And yeah, they were real cool about that. I remember once borrowing an entire hippopotamus skull.
Wow.
And, with the massive tusk, but I couldn't do anything with it because of its size. It was so huge. And it was bigger than everything else I photographed. But so yeah, the university was really helpful, really useful in terms of getting stuff that could be used in photographs back in the day.
That's amazing to have that resource. I was going to ask the question, so thank you so much for answering it. And then you have a whole. If folks go to your website, they can see this whole series of portraits in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. And so, this one I know meant a lot to you.
Yeah, this was Joe, and this one is different from the other portraits in that it was done in a different part of the country. It was done in St. Andrew, which has become sort of a suburb of Kingston, you could say, or an extension of Kingston. But I'd been returning to Jamaica every couple of years, and every time I would go back, I'd photograph. I would take photos, and because I have this connection that I've been talking about with the place and with the people, and I really enjoyed photographing the people and the country in generally. And so eventually I realized that the snapshots and the pictures I was taking with a small camera, they were fine, but it wasn't really accomplishing much. And so back around 93, 94, I applied for a grant and got it. It was a travel grant. And I had a friend who was, an old friend from New York who was getting his MFA in Boulder. I talked him into coming here to get his MFA. But anyway, I talked to him about this project, and he said, and asked him if he was interested in coming to help me with it. And he was, and we decided to use the community where he's from, which is a place called Bamboo in St. Anne's. And that's how the project started. But Joe lived in Stony Hill, across the street from Tina Spiro, who was actually an old friend and a gallerist of mine. She actually was the one who reintroduced my work, or introduced my work to Jamaica. Because I had left Jamaica earlier on, I never had a connection with the arts there. And I didn't know how I would get introduced to the place. And she was really instrumental, really important in making that connection. So he lived in her neighborhood. And she had picked me up from the airport, and we were going up to her house before. And then I saw him across the street, and I said, "The Rasta man, let me have a photograph of man there. Talk to him for me. Tell him I want to take him picture." And she made the connection, and Joe was ready. Joe needed to be paid, though. He was the only person, all of my models, who was paid. But it was worth it. And he's now deceased. He died years ago. But this is how this portrait got made. And in the background, you're seeing like a structure. What happens in Jamaica is a lot of people try and build their own houses. Right? Because there's no major building codes, or there's no anything. You have a piece of land, you can put up anything. So there's a lot of structures like this all over Jamaica of unfinished construction projects where people ran out of money, or they ran out of interest, or who knows what happens. And so you can find a lot of unfinished construction projects dotting the island, and this was one of those. And so,
and you've got the termite nest up there. I love it compositionally because my eye goes up to this big black ball, and then it brings the lean of the tree, the curve of the tree, and the way that he's leaning against the tree. Also, then it brings my eye back down. I start to see kind of how the ivy is going up. So it creates this movement. Was that part of your composition, or is it just like I've got to get this termite nest in there?
Well, obviously it looks like a vertically aligned image the way he's standing, and I wanted the whole thing. And so, yeah, I guess composition just kind of kicked in. It's automatic with me. I don't really think about composition when I'm photographing, not anymore.
Brilliant.
Like driving, you don't think about shifting gears when you shift gears when you're driving. I certainly don't think about composition, but the nest was kind of important. We call them duck ants in Jamaica. And so I've had this kind of conflict about how to title it. Do I title it so Jamaicans can understand it, or the rest of the world? And so I decided to go for the rest of the world and call it a termite, as opposed to duck ants, because nobody knows what I'm talking about outside of Jamaica.
Now we do. I'm loving it.
I mean,
we gotta come.
They'll eat down your house. They'll eat everything.
I couldn't imagine. I wonder if that had something to do with why there was nothing left.
Well, that's why a lot of this stuff is built out of cinder blocks and not wood. All right, so we're now looking at winged evocations from 1997. I've had this vision in my head for years. Remember I told you how I get these visions for artworks. And this one was with me for years and years, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And finally I decided, okay, I gotta do this thing. I gotta figure it out. And I was a little short on skills for this because I'm not a natural born sculptor. And I'm also not very mechanically inclined. And this involved a lot of mechanics. This involved a lot of fabrication and motors and all of this stuff. So there was a colleague, Garrison Roots here, who's now deceased, but he is a sculptor, and I ran into it. I was passing him in the hallway, and I was telling him about this project that I'm working on, and I said, I require, who's your best student? And there was this guy that was coming in the door of the building at the time. He goes, that dude. That dude. And the guy's name was Dan Gilsdorf, and I said, yo, I got a proposal for you here. That's how I approached it. And we've been friends ever since. He was an amazing tattoo artist, and we've traveled with this piece to places like Cuba and other places. Yeah, he helped me figure out a lot of the mechanics because he's an amazing fabricator, amazing skills with machining. And so he did a lot of the mechanics that involve the gear motors on this thing. So it's 4 figures that look like myself. The faces are bronze life masks of myself. And they're set in a field of duck feathers. I started working with feathers in grad school when I decided I needed a break from photography when I was in grad school. And I said I wanted to branch out. I said I might not have this opportunity again. And so I started working with installation and, you know, all kinds of weird materials. And then there are some sensors that are in the feathers that you can't quite see. And once you step into the space, it causes the sensors to activate the figures, and they start beating the wings. And then a piece of music comes on, and it's an old tune from the Wailers back in the day. Not Bob Marley and the Wailers, but the original Wailers.
Oh, okay.
Not Peter and Bunny, and it was a song called Wings of a Dove. And it was actually one of the first songs I remember, earliest songs I remember outside of the national anthem. The first song I remember was the national anthem. I'm born 58, and Jamaica was independent in 62. And so the
anthem's important.
Over again. But anyway, this piece this is at Oberlin, at Allen Memorial Art Museum. And Oberlin, it's interesting that it happened here because they're the ones who funded the project and everything else. Oberlin had reached out to me earlier on in the early years of my career when I was just simply a photographer, and they'd actually did a show called Afro-American Photography. It was William Olander and Deba Patnack were the curators. Olander is now deceased. But they actually bought one of the early purchases from a museum was by them. And then I was doing a talk at Oberlin. Some friends there, Johnny Coleman and his wife Nanette, or his ex-wife. And while I was there, the curator at the Allen Memorial Art Museum wanted to see me. She wanted to propose I do something with the museum. And I had this thing in mind. And actually, this was actually originally supposed to be part of Art Pace, which was a program out of San Antonio, Texas. And it's a residency program. It's a really good residency program. And I was selected for it, but had some family emergencies during that time. And I could not fulfill my obligations with that residency program. I had to drop out of it. I was also doing another project with Brooklyn Academy of Music, which was the Artists in Action program. And that required quite a bit of time because that was a theater project and I had no experience with theater. I was learning on the spot. But anyway, so when I told them about this project that had been put on hold, they were very excited and said, well, we're happy to fund it if you were willing to do it.
That's incredible.
So, sort of how that happened.
And Chinwe is asking, what are the wings made of?
Oh, leave it to Chinwe. She was there when a lot of this stuff was being done, and it stinks something wicked when you soak it in water. These wings are made out of rawhide. They made out of the skins of cows. Right.
Okay, so yes, we can imagine the smell.
Yeah. So to work with it, we had to soak it in like huge tubs, to soften it up. And rawhide is incredibly powerful stuff. I mean, this stuff was used for torture back in the day. When you wet rawhide and you tie it around somebody's throat, you don't have to tie it tight, and you leave them out in the sun, and it contracts and it'll strengthen.
Yeah. Wow.
And so yes, these are made out of rawhide. Leave it to Chime to ask that.
And okay, so with that material, then because I'm thinking it was something more of a gossamer type of material because of the blur. So would the feathers just end up all over the gallery by the end of the day?
I wish. No.
Okay.
It didn't beat fast enough and didn't have enough of a surface area to move enough air to actually move the feathers.
Okay.
So no, they didn't. I thought that might be a problem, but it wasn't.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I would love to see this piece in person sometime.
Well, I don't know when you would. It's sort of in permanent storage in the garage. Anyway.
And yeah, I thought I would end us with Miss Peggy.
Okay, so this is my mother. People in Jamaica end up with all kinds of names that are not theirs. Her name wasn't Peggy, but that's what everybody knew her as. Everybody called her Miss Peggy. Her name was actually Gloria Agnes Chong. But because I think she was, she did have a dentist who kind of was somewhat responsible for her as a child, who was called Mr. Peggy. I remember her telling me this, but anyway, I had done a work of mine about my aunt, who was her sister, called Aunt Winnie. And that one has kind of became sort of one of my best known images and was, sort of everywhere. And I realized I felt badly that I hadn't actually done a work that was simply about my mother. I mean, she was in the Sisters, the one that we saw earlier, but not one directly about her. So I then started to go back and trying to figure out how to make a work that was actually just about her. And so, yeah, I don't know how else to talk about this, but yeah, you're not actually seeing this gold chain she's wearing, which she wore all her life. I covered it up with a flower, but I always remember that chain, which came from Hong Kong, and on and on and on. But yeah, this is about Miss Peggy, my mother.
And the flowers, the flowers are an earlier motif that now you're returning to at this point.
Yeah, it's a way of memorializing these individuals, a way of talking about their lives, bringing them to the public view, and to talk about personal histories of people who are not normally celebrated or who are generally just die and become sort of just a name or anonymous, only remembered by their loved ones, by family. And so I wanted to kind of celebrate the family and to celebrate individuals who are not normally celebrated by, definitely not by white society at any rate, but yes. So it's sort of what this was about bringing her home, talking about somewhat who she was. So yeah.
I love it.
This piece is actually not this one so much, but individuals over the years have been getting in touch with me, asking me to use their own family photos and to do similar kind of still lifes with this. So there's a few that I don't know if you have them, but there are a number of ones. There is one called About Ben Ingram, which was about an African-American man who was a farmer in Georgia, who had a pretty large farm. And he had been accused of murder because he got into an altercation with a white man and ended up killing him, but ended up being acquitted by a jury of his peers in Georgia. And so this was his great-great-granddaughter, who approached me about doing this. And I ended up working, I only work with images that I can engage with, that I find beautiful. I mean, it can't be a blurry snapshot or anything like that. I've had people send me a lot of blurry snapshots over the years, and I said, sorry. You know?
They think they're adding something for you.
But it's funny because the blurry snapshots are what people really cherish, because these are pictures they made themselves. But the picture that I gravitate with are those that are formally done in a photo studio, like this one was. That were, you know, somebody who's trained in the craft of photography. They might not know anything about art or anything else, because they're just kind of, you know, they're just technicians for the most part, who are meeting the needs of a client. Places like Jamaica, it's no different than, say, James Van Der Zee in Harlem, who would have done that, all right? Or any of the other photographers you could think of. Louis Disfarmer, or, you know, Robert Roberts. Anyway, so I find that I only gravitated towards those formally beautifully made ones that were done in photo studios.
I think that makes sense. I mean, you know, as you spoke about with the, you know, the three sisters, they had to take that journey. You know, they're dressed up in their finest way. There's a ritual to going to the photo studio that, I mean, I think is lost when there's just a snapshot taken by someone. So, you know, I can appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, well, you realize the skill of these guys who had these photo studios. You know, they had to make that, you know, that client happy. You know, it would have been no different than, say, Seydou Keita in
Yes.
You know, he had to do the same thing. He was first and foremost a businessman who's trying to make his clients happy. And, you know, because of good fortune, because of the fact that photographs become history, that they end up becoming important historical documents for that place, for Bamako, just like Van Der Zee's portraits of Harlem were important as documents, social documents for African Americans, especially in terms of, you know, Harlem. So, that makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. I think I hope that means that I did a good job for everyone and already asked the questions that you would ask. But you know, what's next for you? Where can we see the next works? Are you gonna have a new book come out? I have a million questions. And then also just, you know, what are the ways that, so this is 3 questions. What's next for you? You know, what can we expect to see next? And then how can we find out about those things from you?
Okay, well, definitely check my website. I'm trying to be more diligent in terms of upcoming events. I wasn't diligent enough to get this on there, but hopefully I'll get the next upcoming events. I'm an odd fish in regards to artists, because I don't always just come up with projects and say, this is what I'm working on. Okay. Generally, I build upon existing projects, you know, and they're generally somewhat general kind of projects, like Jamaican Portraits is sort of general, or the Color Still Lifes are sort of general. I'm not really specific in regards to what I'm doing with these. But in terms of ongoing, yes, I definitely have a lot of work still to do in Jamaica with Carew Castle, which is the family farm. But that's ongoing. I'm also working on, I started work before the pandemic last year, and actually a bit before that, on a series of portfolios called the Baker's Dozen box portfolios, where I'm printing on mat boards. I'm printing on museum boards, you know, museum boards, and they're really beautifully matted. I'm printing 13 images from each series, and they're in a box, a wooden box with a sliding cover, and the lid of the box, it's actually on my website. The lid of the box is a laser engraved image of it. So I'm trying to get those out there to kind of research libraries or, who knows, the university libraries, hopefully, and to even private individuals. But that was one of the projects that's still in the works. I've only managed to sell one so far.
Okay.
I am not a good business person when it comes to the art. If I have a failing, it has to do with the business of the arts. I love making the stuff, but I am really bad at business. My father, which would be turning in his grave now, because he's all about business. He was the absolute businessman with everything. And I don't think I inherited that aspect of him. In terms of books, that's another project. I have been actually working on some monographs of the different bodies of works that I am getting desktop published. And they're coming along. I've got the itrates done, and I'm working on the thrones. And I think those might also be on the website, or I could show you one now if you want. But that is an ongoing project because I'm still in the process of trying to find a publisher. Over the years, I've been approached by a number of art historians and different kinds of people about an interest in working on a monograph, but it has not happened. And so, yeah, there have been some museum catalogs, and I'm in make a lot of guest appearances in larger books and books with like big exhibitions and the likes. But in terms of monographs, I'm definitely failing on that one. And so I expect to try and remedy that with these self-published books. Hang on one sec. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, it'd be great to see one. And while you're getting those, I think it's also you are advertising your work right now and letting folks know that these are coming up. So
Don't know if you can see it real well.
Oh yeah, that's gorgeous. Wow.
Right. So this has been one of the projects that I started working on during the pandemic and just before, actually during the sabbatical as well. They're a bit pricey because
yeah, it looks beautiful. Cloth bound. So it's available now?
Oh yeah, they're available. It's got a plexiglass cover. It's like how many pages? A lot of pages. Need my glasses. I can't see a damn thing. It's got 56 pages and a few essays in there and all of that. So yeah, I'm trying to kind of, remedy my failings in regards to the aspects of the art business.
I think it's like everything else with you. I think this is just the time for it. I wouldn't call it a failing. This is the time it was supposed to come into fruition.
And then the other thing that's happening is looks like I'm gonna be represented in Paris, France, by a gallery there called the Sonia Monti Gallery in Paris. And so I've been through quite a bit of negotiation with them to try and figure out how this will work. But they have some plans, and I guess over the years, the galleries are sort of falling away. I used to be represented quite a bit in all the major cities, but who knows? There's the ups and downs of the art life. And I've just been going through a lot of the downs. So now I've hit the trough. I'm trying to get back up to the crest.
Oh yeah, you're getting there for sure. That is incredible. And so we can find all of this, the best way is through your website.
Through my website, or just email me or whatever, however you want to find me. But yeah, they should all be on the website. And I've improved the website recently, so it's getting a little better.
It's gorgeous. So I know Sade put that link into the chat, and she's putting it there again. Thanks so much, Sade. Yeah, it's a gorgeous website.
Oh, thank you. I think there's a lot of work there, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think why do we make this stuff if we're not going to show it?
It's amazing. I appreciate that, you know, I was able to find so many of the images there and folks can see the depth and breadth. And I really wanted to cover more of it. But obviously, you know, we had a short amount of time with this. And we have come to the end of our conversation for today. And so, you know, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. This has been magical for me. And it seems like from all the comments that I see in the chat, you know, I hope you get a chance to read through some of those. I think this has been magical for other folks as well.
To be able to have this, but I will now. If hopefully it'll still be there when you close.
It will be for sure. And yes, so thank you so much. Peace and blessings to you. I want to let you and everyone know that this conversation, if you joined us late, will be available on Facebook immediately following this. And then by the end of the week, we'll have it on Moad's YouTube channel. So check that. And we'll be back next week with Cheryl Derricott as we close out the year of 2020. And we'll see you in 2021. Any last thoughts, Albert?
No, just I guess my one wish for everybody is that we get through this dark times and that we can get back to being, you know, happy and content in our lives, and that we are living in incredibly perilous times, as we all know, not just with the pandemic, but with all the other existential threats to our existence that we're facing. So I'm hoping that we see clear, that we, you know, live up to the sapiens in our name, you know, as human animals, that we actually can prove that we are intelligent animals, or intelligent man, you know, and to kind of do something about our future, because it gets tough getting up every day when you realize that we might not have a future if we keep going the way we are. We need an absolute change in our values in order to kind of change the downward trajectory that we're on. And it's a trajectory that's going to just lead to nothing but catastrophe and doom for the most part. And so I want to get up, you know, well, definitely after January 20th, I want to get up totally optimistic and feeling like we're going to do something to kind of change this really negative path that we're on as a planet. You know, that we won't kind of self-destruct because of what's supposed to be our intelligence is now turning out to be our stupidity. You know, intelligence without wisdom ends up becoming stupidity. And so
precisely,
it's a problematic times. And yeah, so all I'm gonna say is, you know, hopefully we can go back to creating a better world after this disaster that we're on. I mean, yeah. And that we don't elect any more idiots.
let's just hope. I'm holding out hope that a change is gonna come and it's gonna be positive and it sticks around for a while.
Well, yeah, remember this was an unforced error, to use a long
exactly. That's so true.
You know, everything that we've been through didn't have to happen this way. You know, we would have still had a pandemic, but it didn't have to be. We didn't have to lose over 300,000 people at this rate. So anyway, I'm just hoping that we all go forth and kind of with the goal of, you know, improving our lives and the lives of all on the planet, including our fellow animals. So
that is a beautiful thought.
Yeah,
that's a beautiful thought for us to go into the end of this year.
Blessings to you all.
Blessings to you too. Thank you so much. I appreciate you more than I can express.
Same.
All right. Be well.
Be well, you too. Bye.
Bye, everyone.